Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 614 of the People Behind the Science podcast. Today, we are excited to be rebroadcasting our interview with Dr. Fangang Zeng, and this interview was originally published on May 6th of 2015. Listeners, Fangang is a renowned expert in hearing science and technology. He led development of the Neurotron 26-electrode Cochlear implant, which has helped restore hearing in numerous patients. And he also led development of the SoundCure tinnitus suppressor, which has provided relief for people with chronic ringing in their ears. And in our conversation, Fangang shares more about his career, his life, and his research. So, listeners, I hope you enjoy this episode of People Behind the Science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of People Behind the Science. I am excited to be here today with Dr. Fangang Zeng. So welcome to our show, Fangang. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Murray, for your invitation.
Well, it is wonderful to have you joining us today, and I'm excited to introduce you to our listeners. Now, listeners, Fangang is a professor of otolaryngology as well as anatomy and neurobiology at the University of California, Irvine School of Medicine. He received a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the University of Science and Technology of China and his master's degree in biomedical engineering at the Institute of Physiology, Academica Sinica in Shanghai. Fangang then went on to earn his PhD in hearing science from Syracuse University, and he served as a research associate at the House Ear Institute, as well as an associate professor at the University of Maryland, before joining the faculty at UC Irvine, where he is today. Now, Fangang is also a member of the Acoustical Society of America, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, the Association for Research in Otolaryngology, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And he is here with us today to tell us about his journey through life and science. So today, Fangang, we want to get to know you, both as a scientist, but also as a person. So can you kick off this interview by telling us what you like to do with your time when you're not doing science?
Well, like I'm sitting in my office right now, the questions that I'm thinking, how can we make it people who have hearing loss or other hearing-related problems, they can hear better? That's my scientific question. And without thinking of these scientific questions, I like to just go outdoors, play basketball, and play with my kids or cook at home.
Wonderful. Well, great to hear a little bit about your family life and what you like to do when you're not working. So is there a particular thing that you like to cook when you're in the kitchen working?
It's a mixture of Oriental and American food. Like last night, I just made something very simple. We got some salmon from a Whole Food Choice, and they just grilled them with some garlic and olive oil. That's all it took, and it will taste wonderful.
Well, you're making me hungry already. I haven't had lunch yet. That sounds fantastic. So great to hear how you spend your time when you're not at work. And I love to talk to scientists about sort of their elevator pitch, how they describe what they do in science to someone who might not be familiar. So can you give us a short couple-sentence description of what you do?
As you said, I have a combination of engineering and neuroscience degrees, and that's where my training is. And that's sort of what I'm doing. We're trying to put in an electronic device to stimulate a nerve, in this case, auditory nerve, so people who have a profound hearing loss can hear the sound again. And I've been doing this for the last 25 years. And more recently, I'm trying to attack a very different problem. And remember, people who cannot hear, now we give them an electronic device called a cochlear implant. They can hear again. And recently, there are a lot of people, they have the reverse problem. They hear sounds when there's actually no sounds there, tinnitus or tinnitus. And for whatever reason, we seem to have a lot of patients who have this particular problem. And how do you get the sound out of their head? So that's a new challenge, and there's no cure. And I'm fascinated by this problem, and I have a little bit myself, and we're trying to understand it, and hopefully we'll find a cure someday.
Well, very interesting, really approaching these auditory impairments from both ends of the spectrum, people who can't hear and people who are hearing sort of extraneous noise that isn't actually there in the environment. Very cool. So we like to talk about motivational factors and inspire our listeners on this show. And I'm a quote person myself. So can you share with us today, Fangang, one of these quotes that you love that motivates or inspires you?
I agree with you. Motivation is the most important thing. You come to your office, your lab, or whatever, and you really feel passion for it. And for me, I think the passion was relatively easy. As for whatever reason, I'm interested in language. And hearing is a very significant part of language. I remember when I graduated from the University of Science and Technology in China, that was like early 80s. And a professor just told me, hey, next century is the century for biology. So I got interested in biology and in hearing in particular. And at that time, there wasn't much going on in cochlear implants or electric stimulation of auditory nerves to restore deaf hearing. I went on to more traditional route to study normal hearing. But I think it's just fascinating, looking back, what motivated me for so many years. And I think it's just motivation to understand how we understand speech, develop language, and of course I would love to do all of the above, but I understand to go into depth you have to focus on something, and hearing turned out to be the area that I focused on and become pretty good at.
Certainly. Well, I love this description of how you're driven by curiosity, of wanting to know the answer to these questions, of observing the world and seeing how things work and always having more questions. And I think that's a characteristic that a lot of scientists share. And that's one of the things that keeps you going into the office every day and keeps you going to the lab and maybe staying there late at night.
You're right. Yeah.
So wonderful to hear about your experiences. And I'm curious to hear, you mentioned this one teacher that you had who gave you this inspirational quote about the next century being the century of biology. Are there other people who you can think of along your journey who maybe had a big impact on you or served as role models?
Absolutely. After listening to the professor at the university, so I took some biology courses, and I got into Institute of Physiology, where I met a great many of scientists, and many of them. Remember, that was at very early days in China. China just opened its door. But the scientists I met at that time, they were trained either in America and a few of them in Russia, and they came back and didn't do much, through the Cultural Revolution. And after that, there was definitely renewed enthusiasm. People thought that we wasted so much time, we tried to catch up. And that's very inspirational. For me, as a young kid who didn't know much and was not exposed to what the modern science was about, and talking to these guys and following their examples, for me, is a turning point in my life for me to become who I am and what I'm doing today.
Definitely. Well, great to hear about what got you started. Is there a particular memory that you can pinpoint of maybe what turned your eye towards science to begin with when you were a kid?
I tell you, my father, he would be happy just to see me become a carpenter and make living for myself. Mm-hmm. So his expectation wasn't that high. But I actually got into college at a very young age. This has all happened after Cultural Revolution, where I think at that time, all of a sudden the door was opened, and whoever took the opportunity can get into the door to develop the interest. And I think the curiosity was, I was just a kid, and I was interested in a lot of things. But language is definitely something that I was very interested in, and I'm still very interested. It's hard for me to say, hey, there's one incident that changed my mind. And it's just like a lifetime passion to pursue this area of research.
Definitely. I know a lot of us scientists too have these sort of meandering paths. I know I myself am a neuroscientist now, but there were points where I wanted to be a marine biologist. I wanted to be an astronaut. There was a variety of different things I wanted to do along the way. Did you ever wander? Did you sort of have this interest in language and hearing persist throughout your career?
Yeah, maybe I can tell you one incident. I was trying to learn English as a teenager, and it's not natural as you learn a language as a baby, right? I wonder, I say, well, what does it take, for a person to master another language? And my hope was that someday I'll be able to, like say you listen to your native language, you really don't have to pay that much attention. But whatever you're interested in, you can just get in and focus and grasp everything you want to know. But if I listen to another language, it's very difficult. And I thought, God, gee whiz, how wonderful if I could driving while listening to radio effortless. Mm-hmm. And whatever grasps my attention, I can just pay attention and get everything. This is, and how do we do that? I'm still very curious about the process. And later on, thinking about that's what I'm doing now. A deaf person who had a language before and then for whatever reason become deaf, and now you give them a very crude device called a cochlear implant. And they sort of had to relearn as a second language. And what does it take and what does it sound to them? To me, this is the kind of thing very interesting and played a role in helping these people hear better, either rehabilitate their language, or if right now we can put a cochlear implant in an infant. They never had any hearing at all, and you give them a medical device at a very young age so they can develop a normal language. That's just amazing.
Yes, that is absolutely phenomenal. Interesting to hear how you also became interested in this learning aspect of it. Where do you pick up language skills along the way? And it is so much harder to do when you're older. I know I've sort of took Spanish at one point in high school and then tried to pick it back up again. It is way more challenging now.
Right. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We don't know where exactly, but I think it's not because us, the biomedical engineers, who designed a perfect device and sticking a deaf person's ear so they can hear. Well, we give them enough, and the wonder is actually in the brain. Right? It's the patients who have that neural network, and then it takes practice, training, learning. Motivation is a very important factor. If you don't want to hear, you're not going to hear very well. Mm-hmm. If you're motivated to learn, to train yourself, with the crude information we provided through a cochlear implant, well, these people do very well.
Very, very interesting. Well, it's great to hear a little bit more about your work and a little bit more about your early days. Now, I know you did some of your earlier training, your master's degree, your undergraduate degree in China, and then you came to the United States. What was that experience like, moving from one culture to another scientifically?
That was a culture shock. I mean, China today is very different from China 30 years ago. I don't know whether you've been to China.
I have not.
Unless you go pretty far place, you're not going to see the China that I used to live 30, 40 years ago. I mean, I came to the United States 87, right? There's one McDonald's in the entire China in Beijing.
I like it that that's your cultural landmark right there.
Okay. There's no Burger King, no KFC, no Pizza Hut, or nothing. I think there's maybe a couple of American hotels, Hilton in Shanghai. That's about it, right? And now if you go to China, I remember I was amazed the reason I took my kids to visit China. And the KFC in Beijing is a 3-story building.
Oh, wow.
It's a 3-story building. It's just amazing. Yeah, I mean, you can probably see 4 Starbucks within just, looking at 4 directions. It's a very globalized. But China at that time is very different. I remember I came with $40 in my pocket, and the ticket was purchased by a friend who came to States just a year ahead of me. And I landed in LAX, and I didn't know. I have to take my 2 suitcases out to go through the custom. Nobody told me that.
So
I got into another airplane and went to New York. And I landed in New York, and all I got is just a little backpack with me. But
no suitcases.
And my advisor, Chris Turner at Syracuse, took me out of the airport and asked me, "Where's your luggage?" I said, "Oh, they should come here." We waited. These 2 suitcases never showed up. But hey, I learned how to travel light now.
That's right.
Anywhere I go, I just have one backpack.
Well, that is an incredible story. And I know a lot of young scientists, when they first come from another country to a new place, whether it's the United States or anywhere else internationally, it is a culture shock. So what are some of the things that really helped you get settled in and get comfortable?
I actually was glad I went to a place like Syracuse. I had options to go somewhere else. I landed in California, stayed there because there's a huge Chinese community, and you probably don't have to speak much English to be able to get by. And I was the only Chinese or Asian in my program at that time. So I was forced to learn English. And it's very different. I mean, I'll tell you, I can probably hear the words. And when you put each word, I seem to understand what it means. And when you put them together, I just get lost. I remember a few things like, say, he's a big shot, a hot shot. And I said, okay, I know each one of the single word, but put them together, right. He's a big shot. What does that mean? I remember I have a notebook. Whatever I don't understand, I said, write them down and tell me. I mean, there's no internet at that time. You cannot Google and find out what they mean. So I think for me, I'm so happy that I went to a place where I have a great friends. I mean, I just went back to Syracuse after, 25 or 26 years. And we all have kids. And that feeling, the bonding experience, what I learned from them. And of course, I'll tell them what China was like. So I think that a mutual experience was great, a bonding experience for all of us.
Well, it sounds like you had a wonderful and supportive group there in Syracuse to help you get settled in, which is excellent.
Absolutely.
And it's great to hear about your career experiences and some of these steps along the way that helped you get to where you are. But can you tell us now, Fangang, a little bit more about what you're working on now and one of these projects that you are the most excited about?
I think a cochlear implant is sure a wonder. And I'll just tell you a little bit about that before we go on to the tinnitus in trying to get the sound out of people's head. When I went to Syracuse, I said, I was doing normal hearing research. My dissertation was about forward masking intensity discrimination or intensity discrimination forward masking. I mean, it's just a term you throw out 5 people in the world maybe know or care about. After that, I was thinking, maybe I want to do something that is a little bit more practical. And at that time, I thought, hey, I should go back to cochlear implants and to develop a practical product that people can benefit to improve their quality of life. But I remember my advisor told me, no, don't do that. I mean, at that time, the mainstream scientific community was kind of against it. Thought it was unethical to put a very crude device in somebody's head. It may or may not produce any positive or beneficial result. And I remember my advisor told me, hey, it's a black hole. You may get in and never get out. And that
could be a career ender.
Your
Yeah.
scientific career. But I took a chance. I went to House Year Institute, and where it was founded by a surgeon at that time. It helped a lot of actual people from Hollywood, actors, actresses, and they were grateful and donated money to start this institute. And that's probably a place like that where you're allowed to do some bold, innovative, highly risky project like a cochlear implant. NIH will not fund that project for sure.
Right.
And I went in there and I took a risk. And it made me so happy that there's about 400,000 people with hearing loss, and they haven't received a cochlear implant. And about half of them are children.
Oh, wow.
And they all benefited. My daughter's high school, University High, where we live in Orange County, all hearing impaired kids, they all go to the same high school. So every morning, they bus about 200, 300 kids, and most of them have cochlear implants now. And except one or two classes, they're with themselves. Otherwise, they're with other kids with normal hearing. Mm-hmm. How wonderful that is, right? I mean, I think what you want to do. If I had a deaf child before cochlear implants, what opportunities this child would have? Well, without hearing, it's unlikely a child would develop the oral language. They can do sign language, but the average reading level is about 4th grade. It's very hard for a deaf child to develop languages or reading skills beyond 4th grade. You need auditory hearing input. Whereas back to the beginning, what we said about hearing is very important and it will allow you to develop a language. So I'm very happy with the choice I made. Now it's 25 years ago.
Definitely. We're glad you didn't take your advisor's advice there.
Sometimes science becomes so specialized these days, and we only see a couple of leaves in front of our eyes. We forgot the big forest behind it.
Mm-hmm. And I think this need to apply is something that a lot of scientists experience. There's a lot of researchers who work in basic science and can find it very exciting. But I know I myself was one of these people where I wanted to do something where I was helping patients or working with people to have an impact with some of the work that I do. And I think this is something a lot of scientists experience. And it's wonderful to talk to people who have had this opportunity where they can do it. So do you actually get to meet with some of these people with cochlear implants and work with them directly at all?
I do. I'm not a surgeon. I don't implant, but I designed the implant and we test it, try to improve it. And now, guess what? The cochlear implant has become a very powerful research tool. We have a lot of neuroscientists interested in this. Thinking about it, the auditory cortex was not stimulated in a deaf in the baby, and all of a sudden stimulated. And which part is stimulated, how to develop its structure to serve the kind of function needed. So, it's really opened a door for researchers who are trying to understand how the brain works. So to some extent, you are able to develop a device not only to help people, but to use it as a research tool to answer some of the very fundamental questions in brain development, structure and function. So this is exciting, very exciting.
Very, very cool work that you're doing, Fenggang. And I think so far we've described a lot of the wonderful aspects of science. And I know every scientist has struggles and challenges that they face along the way as well. And I'd like to touch on some of those just to give our listeners an idea out there of what they might encounter on the path in science. And it's one of those things where I think we talk about a lot of the great things and you don't always hear about some of the downsides. So can you share an experience that you've had where you had a major failure or you really struggled with something, and tell us how you got through it?
Well, I'm experiencing one right now. I have developed into a relatively successful researcher in the cochlear implant field, and where you get invited to all sorts of meetings, write books, editorials. Mm-hmm. But then once I started to get into a sort of slightly different field, the tinnitus, it's a very different dynamics, different group of researchers.
You're the new kid again, yeah.
Yeah, you're trying to knock on the door, trying to get in again. They didn't know who you are. You're just another new kid in the block trying to get into the door. That experience really shaped me. If you want to become a successful, not just in research, the passion is important. Persistence is very important. People will say no to you, and I'm still trying to get my first grant from NIH so I can study on tinnitus. I've been doing this for 7-8 years, and I was supported by patient group, American Tinnitus Association, mostly. They're willing to take a risk or gamble on some guy who didn't have much experience, because they realize if you can develop something, or maybe this is what we need to help advance the field. But, most of the federal big grants, NIH or NSF, we're talking about translational high risk, high payoff stuff. But in reality, it's very conservative. Mm-hmm. And how do you overcome that hurdles and the mentality and produce still high quality research that will advance the field and also In my case, I was trying to develop maybe a cure, taking multiple steps to get there for a disease that currently has no cure, zero. And there's a lot of people affected by it. And if you talk to some of the patients, and that's what keeps me going, it's a difficult time for me, trying to maintain a lab and allocate my resources, even my own attention, my time to something that I feel passionate about, may take time to develop, to mature.
Certainly. I think you have to get pretty strategic. And I think you brought up a really great point about funding mechanisms. And I think even some of the National Institute of Health, the high risk funding mechanisms, you have to have a proven track record. It's just sort of the idea that is novel and risky, but it's so hard entering a new field not having that track record and trying to get established. So really important point to bring up. And we don't just want to talk about the tough times. Fanggang, I'd like to talk next about one of your success stories. So can you share one with us today? And it can be a small victory or one of these big successes that you've had.
I think the success is something that I started about 9 years ago. And the cochlear implant, as I said, has developed over the last 20, 30 years into a very successful device that restored a human sense for the first time. And now people are trying to do the eye implant for blind people, some spinal cord stimulator for paralyzed people, etc. But cochlear implants were the most successful one. And Forrester is, however, it's so expensive. Would you guess how much it will cost to get a cochlear implant in the United States?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I know how much a deep brain stimulator surgery costs, so I'm going to base it off of that and maybe say a little bit more. We'll say $150,000, $200,000?
Well, that's older days, yeah. That's what eye implant costs. I think you have to go to Hopkins or Stanford or some private institute to spend $100,000 to get a cochlear implant.
Yeah.
And for us, it's probably $50,000 to $60,000 to get a cochlear implant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, do they usually do them bilaterally, or do you just do them on one side?
Just one. If you get both, you're right. It's over $100,000 for both. And most people, if they're deaf on both sides. So you need two. That's over $150,000.
Gotcha. Yeah. And is this mostly cost to the patient, or is this something insurance covers? Do you know?
That's a good question. You have to have a premium insurance to cover the whole thing.
Okay.
Medicare only covers $20,000.
Oh my gosh.
For both device and surgery. So you either have another secondary insurance, or you have to pay from your pocket to pay for the difference. And if you're Medicare,
that's just not feasible.
It will pay you $20,000, and you need at least another $30,000, $40,000 to cover for it. It's very tough. So that's the question. Now, remember, if it's expensive already in the United States, and what it will be like for a developing country like China, India, South America, Eastern Europe, Africa, Middle East, you name it.
Gotcha.
So it's prohibitively expensive. And it's a wonderful device. The dilemma is places like China, India, they have more definite people than what we have here, because the ototoxical drug-induced hearing loss, they're the number one cause. Okay, in these developing places, United States is mostly noise-induced. And so we have a lot of people who are in need of this technology or device, but cannot afford it. And I've been trying to say, is that wonderful if we can develop a lower cost device that still gives the same level of performance, so people from all over the world, not just Europe, United States, can benefit from this technology. So that's what I've been doing. And, we started a company in Irvine, and we developed a prototype with a technology transfer from the University of California. And then once we got a prototype, and then we moved the manufacturing facility to China, where we can take advantage of the cheaper labor, cheaper land, and the infrastructure there. And it took us 5 years, and we got a Chinese FDA approval for a low-cost, high-performance device.
Oh, wow.
And I'm very happy to tell you, Murray, right now, 3 years after approval, we got more than 2,000 patients implanted with this device.
That is phenomenal.
Yeah, and probably nearly 100 of them from India, Colombia, Turkey, and other places. I think it will help a lot of people down the road. And the thing that I'm so proud of when you say success, to me, success is we are able now to lower the cochlear implant price only in China to just about a third of the price of 5 years ago.
Oh, wow. That is incredible.
Imagine what that means. You can purchase one price to help one deaf child 3 years ago, and now for the same price, you can help three. I'm hoping this will create a rippling effect to the nearby countries, eventually here in the States, and so we can all benefit.
Well, congratulations on that very exciting success and really being able to have an impact on so many people by making this technology more accessible for people. I think that is just incredible. So wonderful to hear about one of your successes. And I think in science, you have a lot of exciting successes. The research is very motivating and you work really hard. And it doesn't always leave time to do all the other things in the world you'd like to do. And I think one of the things that often falls by the wayside when I chat with researchers is reading for fun. So you read quite a bit of the literature and kind of staying up to date on your field, but you don't get to spend a lot of time just reading novels. So do you have a book recommendation for us who might be trying to squeeze a little more reading into our lives of a book that you've read and really enjoyed?
I think you're right. Life is more than just a science. As I'm getting older, I recognize that. And I read quite broadly. And the two books I'm reading now, I'm reading Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. He's telling his idea how to develop something that will take over the world.
Okay.
Like, I mean,
interesting deviousness coming through.
That. I think there's a very intricate balance between technology and human society.
Certainly.
Between money and non-money side of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And the other book I'm reading is actually a classic book, Brothers Karamazov. It's a long, long book. On my iPhone, it's 4,000 pages.
Oh, wow.
I'm about a quarter through that. It's just about life in 18th centuries in Russia. Brothers, family, love, get through good and bad times. I think this is humanity. I think why it's a classic, why we care about what happened 200 years ago, because the same things are going on in families. It can be anywhere in the world. And I think that there's something we can learn from that.
Absolutely. That's one of the things I love, kind of picking up these old classic books. And you're right. Some of maybe the language is a little bit different. The lifestyle is a little bit different, but there are just some common themes that you can definitely relate to even hundreds of years after this book was written, which I think is just phenomenal. So great recommendations for us. I'll put that out on our website for our listeners to check out if they're looking for their next book. And I know we talked about some different opportunities that you've had to travel as a scientist. And I'd love to chat with scientists about these opportunities because I think the world doesn't realize how much traveling scientists actually do. So can you think back about all the places that you've been and tell us about your favorite?
For anybody who wants to become a scientist, the bonus you get is you get to meet people from all over the world and travel to all kind of places. I've traveled all over the world myself. Just 2 months ago, I was in India. That was my first time to visit there. And I could only afford to spend a day and a half in India. Guess what? It took me a day and a half to get there.
Right.
I arrived in Delhi. Then I have a flight from Delhi to a place called Visakhapatnam. It's just a 1 hour flight. But I have like a 7 hour stop in Delhi, so I visited their old temple there. And what I learned was, this is just fascinating. I didn't know about it. Apparently in the 11th century, and India was taken over by a ruler from now Afghanistan. And they actually occupied and took over the whole India for another 300-400 years until British took over India. And the guy who took over, and he just took materials from other temples and built his own, the polished one. And I look at it, what kind of a person this is.
Pieced it together.
Yeah.
Very cool.
You learn about it in religion. I was told that there's probably 60% Hindus and maybe 30% Muslims and 10% Christians in India. To me, that composition, how they coexist and live relatively peacefully there, it's just amazing. And I think another thing sort of blew my mind away. When I look at India, we went to the coastal cities. I just spent a couple of nights a day there. It's just beautiful. It reminded me, places just like California, can be Nice in France, and that a natural beauty, just similar. Doesn't matter which bay you visit.
Right.
Right. But
it can be thousands of miles away and it feels the same. I like it.
Yeah. But then I think that what struck me was the contrast. And I can see those beautiful condos in a 5-star hotel. And then right next to it, you will see little tents. This is probably made of a piece of boxes, right? And, people just break the tree branches and lit up the fire and make some simple food. And I look at these guys, they look pretty happy, at least to get by with their daily life they have. Mm-hmm. And it gives me a really perspective. Sometimes when we talk about, globalization, right? We all need iPhone, internet to be able to survive. I look at the people who live maybe with less than $1 per day kind of budget. And this still seems to be pretty happy to me, probably less bothered by the modern things. I would love to send you a picture. There are 5 or 6 of them. They just do meditation session on the beach. And they're so peaceful early in the morning.
That sounds wonderful. Well, and I think so important to see different cultures, see the way people live, and really get an appreciation of this globalization concept you're describing, having a sense of how things operate across the world and not just be familiar with your own culture, your own sort of surroundings that you see immediately. And I think that's really cool to have that juxtaposition sort of side by side, completely different ways of life together and everyone getting along fairly well within that context. So really, really cool experience that you described.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, these travel opportunities are just phenomenal in science. And we talked about some of the different experiences that you've had over the course of your career and some of the people who you've encountered over the course of your career as well. And I think as scientists, we have a lot of opportunities to work with great people. And I think there are some stereotypes out there about how scientists are and some sort of portrayals in the media that I don't necessarily agree with. And so I'm always trying to break those stereotypes on our program. So one thing that I like to ask is for our researchers to share maybe the lighter side of science. So tell us a quirky tradition that you've experienced in a lab, or maybe just a funny memory from your science career that really stuck with you.
Oh, so the non-scientific aspect. Yeah. No, scientists are human. They're no different from anybody else. I don't think we're any more different than another profession, musicians or basketball player or chefs. We may just have a different set of training. But if you look at the people who are successful in their own profession, they all share pretty much the same traits. You have to be motivated. You have to spend time on what you're doing and perfect it. And sometimes you have to get lucky.
I think this luck plays a huge role in science.
Oh, absolutely. But remember also, chances only favor those who are prepared.
That's right.
You don't know what you have, and then you just pass it easily. But if you always look for it, and that's, I think we talk about a curiosity, it plays a very important role. But you have to also be prepared at the same time. Scientists, I don't think they're unique by any means. If anytime you think you're different from others, to me, that's the end of it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I love that you're mentioning this sort of human side of science, and science is done by people. And when it comes down to it, you may be accomplished, you may work very hard, you may love what you do, but you are people. And I think that's so important to convey to the public and to the world and to show this human face of science. So can you tell us about maybe one of the things that you do within your own laboratory now that really shows the human side? Do you have a tradition? Do you in your lab spend time together outside of the lab?
Well, we do potlucks. We play volleyball games.
So are you an excellent volleybable player?
Oh, yeah. I'm pretty good at volleyball.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You don't want to brag, but you've got a killer spike, right?
Yeah, I can jump, but I'll say how long I can sure do that. Yeah, I think it's a great bonding experience. But maybe we should do this more often. I used to do it very often. And all of a sudden I realized, boy, I'm the oldest in the room.
But as long as you're still young at heart, it doesn't matter.
Through most of my career, I was always the youngest in my class. At school, whatever setting. And then in the last 10 or 20 years, all of a sudden you look around and say, wow, what a change.
When did this happen? Yeah.
When did that happen? Exactly. But I think this is also why I like the university job. Every 4 or 5 years, you have a new crop of talented people. They come to you because they want to learn. And I just, share whatever I have and work with them. And I run a very loose lab. We have one lab meeting per week for an hour. You can talk about your paper, talk about somebody else's papers, and it's very relaxed. I think I've really changed my sort of management style from very hands-on to now very relaxed. I say, just make some mistakes, right? Even 3 years, you still haven't defined a topic in your dissertation. Now maybe we should talk.
Then you can get more hands-on, yeah.
I know we have a more hands-on approach. Have a daily or if needed, a weekly or daily meeting if you need it.
Gotcha. Well, wonderful to hear about the culture of your lab. And I think this culture is so important for keeping students happy and training the next generation of scientists. And I think you're right. You have to sometimes give people that freedom to make mistakes and to figure things out on their own. So right. Wonderful to hear about some of the traditions that you guys have too, playing volleyball, having potlucks. I love it. And I know scientists in the laboratory, you have these regular lab meetings, you talk about the science that's going on, maybe share some literature papers, but it's also fun to talk about those big questions that you would just love to answer. And I think every scientist has at least a few of those. So can you share with us today, Fangong, what is one of your questions that if things like funding and staff and technology and feasibility, all these normal restrictions in science were not an issue, what is the question you want to answer?
There's a lot of questions in my mind. I like physics. The origin of the universe is really limited or unlimited. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of interested in these sort of things. And now, more practical for us, we're talking about the brain. You're a neuroscientist yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And these are connections of trillions of neurons. Where does it come from? How does it talk to each other? The cells talk to each other to do the kind of things they're doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, should we worry about artificial intelligence? Would it take over, as some of us are afraid? And I personally, I would say I would like to develop maybe automatic algorithm. Maybe I'll work someday for another computer company, just develop an automated algorithm that'll be able to do some of the things we humans are doing naturally, like we're talking to each other, recognize speech.
Responding appropriately most of the time. Yeah.
Yeah, show me a picture. I'll tell you where they are. And these sort of things are very difficult for computers to do these days.
I struggle with Siri on my phone. She doesn't understand me.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we made some progress. But the way I see it, the computers, the technology in these days, they're probably just either we take a very different approach compared with how we and the brain works, right? Or we just don't understand it. I think you have to start all over again as I'm trying to do my PhD. This is probably the one question I like to ask and hopefully be able to do. Hey, make computers smarter. Just do some of the things that we humans can do easily.
Definitely. Well, these are some fantastic questions for us to ponder. And I myself, with the neuroscience interest, really get hooked on these questions of how do we go from, these very basic cells that are communicating to each other to all the dynamic and complex things that people are doing, even just down to the basic personality traits that people have. So great questions. And now I think as a scientist, you get to have this wonderful opportunity to work on these big questions, but you also get some great advice along the way from all your mentors, all your peers and colleagues. So can you share with us, Fangong, what you would consider the best piece of advice that you received along the way?
Well, it's probably from my postdoc advisor, Bob Shannon, who's now professor at USC, University of Southern California. He just said, have fun. And this is something we talk a little bit about. You feel what you're doing is fun. And this is what keeps you going, not just for a day, a week, a month. It's lifetime passion in his mind to do research. It's not to work. You come here and you interact with the best people, best minds in the world. How fun that is, right? You do research, you design experiments, and that's not a burden at all. I think he has a great influence on the kind of mentality I have developed and hopefully maybe I'll convey to my students. Make what you're doing fun.
Well, I think that is wonderful advice, short and sweet. I like it. Have fun. And I think you're absolutely right. It is such a privilege to be able to go into work every day and try and answer cool questions. When it comes down to it, that's what you're doing as a scientist. There's a lot of other things that go along with it, but just kind of sticking to that curiosity and making it fun, I think is a great approach. Now, Fangong, is there any other last piece of advice or maybe a last piece of inspiration that you want to leave our listeners with today now coming from you?
Well, I'm very happy with what I'm doing and what I've been doing and what I'm going to do. This is just what has kept myself doing the kind of things I do. I think that passion, that's the key. Just like my postdoc advisor, Bob Shannon, said, have fun. Find what is fun and work with the people who seems to have fun and you'll be okay.
Absolutely. Well said. And listeners, definitely make sure you are having fun in finding what you enjoy to do and pursuing that. And thank you so much for your time today, Fangong. Can you tell our listeners how they can reach out to learn more about you and your research?
Yeah, I can be reached at my email, F in Frank, Z in Zebra, ENG at uci.edu. Or you can check out Center's website at hearing.uci.edu.
Wonderful. Well, listeners, definitely check out the work that he is doing. See if there's any fantastic updates from the center as well. And Fangong, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story.
Well, thank you, Murray. It's my pleasure.
Well, it was a joy to hear about your experiences. And thank you, listeners, for joining us today as well. We'll see you again next time on another episode of People Behind the Science. Your voyage to the lives of today's exceptional scientists has just begun. You can find everything we talked about today, including our guests' favorite books, biographies, photos, and more, when you visit us at www.peoplebehindthescience.com. I look forward to seeing you next time on People Behind the Science.